are here with the best neighbours in the world.
Yes.
Pete and Sarah Wynter, who live literally yards from us. And Pete, of course, is one of the clergy here. He's been here for 6 years on the staff here, and heads up a lot of the activities of HTB, in particular the services at Onslow Square, Leadership College, and lots of the youth focus, rising generation, and so many other areas.
A lot of help from some great people.
And Sarah, as Nikki said, that you are the best neighbours. Sarah, because of my health, I haven't been going out so much. Sarah has done all my shopping, Sarah and Pete between them. Get lovely little texts saying, I'm going to the shops, can I get... Poor Sarah, her back must be killing her, the amount of shopping she's done for me. But you're also a freelance editor. You work for CRT, the Church Revitalization Trust, doing their magazine. You support Pete and running the services at Onslow Square, 10:30 service. You've got
4:30 and the 4:30.
And the 4:30, and you have 3 children, homeschooling, all the rest. So life is busy for you guys. How are you coping with how have you coped in this season with family life and children and homeschooling? How's it been for you guys?
Oh, well,
interesting.
It has been interesting. I mean, like so many people, it's been quite a disorientating season. You know, it's not what any of us expected. It's been, it felt quite a quick adjustment to suddenly having everyone at home. I've described it, haven't I, like a Formula One racing track where you can just feel as if you're going round and round and round the same track over and over again, and can't work out if that was a good lap or a bad lap.
What are the struggles that you found?
Well, there's been I think for me it's been couched in the lack of headspace. You know, there's been a relentlessness to sort of constant engagement with little people all the time, which I think is just, as the weeks and the months have gone on, the lack of space has been challenging, hasn't it?
Yeah, it really has.
I guess one of the things that a lot of people are coping with at the moment is loss. Some people it's loss of job, loss of finances, loss of freedom, loss of all the activities that they've usually enjoyed. But you guys have had to cope with loss. And Pete, you've had to cope with very serious loss with your brother. Just talk a bit about what you've learned about coping with loss.
It's hard when you lose. As you mentioned, Nikki, I lost my brother to cancer a few years ago. And then my father also, I lost it. He had cancer as well. So they haven't died during this COVID time. And I know some people will be facing grief and loss right now in this moment. But it's so sad. There's a sense of not being able to be in control of that. And I think that's one of the difficult things when you face loss. You feel like something's gone out of my hands that I can't get back again. And with that carries grief. And one of the things I think I read when Mark had died, and sadly he left behind 2 little boys and his wife. And so that was very traumatic for us as a family, and particularly for them in having to process that. There's all kinds of questions that come. And all kinds of, you're asking questions of God, you're asking questions of the situation, and there aren't easy answers. So one of the things I think I learned in that time was that you need to create time to be able to grieve, rather than just plow on. You know, sometimes you can just think, I've just got to get on with life, but we've got to create time to grieve, which for me meant, having space to process a bit. And I would encourage people to be doing that when they feel that sense of grief, and that growing kindness towards yourself. That it's actually okay to try and be kind to yourself in the process of making that time. But the grief as well comes in waves, and I've definitely learned that through that experience. And I felt that actually even during this COVID time, with the loss of some of the things that we've looked forward to or wanted to happen, and now they can't happen. And it comes in waves, grief. It will, some days it feels fine, and you feel like, oh, we've bounced back, it's all okay, and today's been a good day. And then the next day you get hit by this sense of loss, and I still feel that, several years after my brother died, and my father, I still feel there are days sometimes when I just get hit with a sense of loss and sadness, and that's just the best emotional, phrase to use. I just feel sad. But But recognizing that grief will come in waves is really helpful, I think, then for being able to make sure you give yourself time in moments where you need to remember and you need to give thanks. And then in that time, you can then begin to move forwards. But it takes time. And I think as a nation, we're going to see a huge amount of grief in the coming months. And we need to be kind to each other, gracious to each other, and kind to the people around us who we know have lost a huge amount. And that kindness will help over the course of time, recognizing that there'll be wave after wave of grief as a result of all that's happened in this time of COVID.
And Sarah, I mean, you've obviously, there'll be loss of all sorts of things, holidays, expectations and things, but also you had to support Pete when he was going through this really difficult loss. What have you learned about how you support people who are going through serious loss?
Well, I think something that someone said to us at the time, which we both found helpful, was, the ability to sort of contract your horizons, so not to look too far ahead. Because I think in periods of grief and loss, there's, you have to just live and walk through that moment. It's hard to feel and to look too far beyond. And I think that's true of this period as well. There's been so much uncertainty in our landscape that I think that's come back to us a few times of how important it is. There's words, beautiful words in Matthew 6 that Jesus speaks about, don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow has enough worries of its own. You just look to this day. And I think there's something in a time of great uncertainty and of grieving where actually, we have today, and we know that God is with us today, and his goodness and his faithfulness is with us today. I think the ability to sit in that moment and to acknowledge the pain and to sit with it is a discipline, because we're so used to wanting to move beyond or to look ahead. But I think it's to allow space for the grief. I think that's quite important.
And I think closely related to loss is disappointment. And one of the things we share, Pete and Sarah, but I guess we had this vision for this new youth side to Focus Alive, and I think we were all so excited about it, and now it's going to take a very different form.
You're right, Nikki. We've been so excited about Focus Alive and seeing all these young people gathered from all over the HTB network, primarily, and it would have been such a celebration, and suddenly, all the plans have got to change. We are actually doing something as an online one day on the 25th of July, which would be great, but it's not what we had planned.
I think it sounds exciting, Pete. I mean, you're amazing the way you can adapt and change these things. And I think you've got an amazing plan, haven't you?
We're trying to pull it together, and it will be a great day. It will be a really great day. But I think, that is one of the things that we need in this season. We need a massive amount of adaptability. In fact, that's one of the watchwords I keep seeing. I like to try and keep abreast of leadership and leadership coaching and development, and I've seen that word adaptability more in the last few months than any time that I've over the last sort of decade or so, trying to read and keep up with anyone who's talking about leadership. Adaptability is exactly the word that people are using, and is what's needed. And that's needed when you're going to overcome disappointment, because you have hopes and dreams and desires to see something fulfilled, and suddenly you have to pivot and change. And so the ability to build adaptability is going to be really important for the coming months and possibly years as we rebuild out of this time.
Pete, is it easier for some people to adapt more than others? Some people hate change, and do you think that sort of within people is a sort of fighting to stay the same? But what happens if you're a bit like that? You don't actually like change very much, yet you've got to adapt. And
that's your wife. I think that's me.
Yeah, you don't like the change. I love change all the time. I'm like, just give me change all the time. But
Pete's forever changing our rooms around and changing pictures, changing furniture, and changing children's bedrooms. I'm quite exhausted by it.
The reality is, I think everyone finds it hard to change at some level. And you're right, Pip. Some people find that much harder. But it's okay to find change difficult. But I think we're all going to have to face into it, and that need for adaptability in an ever-changing landscape is really important moving forwards. And actually we've been, through all the challenges that we've been facing, there are great opportunities. Often with the challenge comes the opportunity, and the possibility for this crisis that, crisis provokes challenge, and that challenge provokes change. It's an opportunity for change, and there's an opportunity here for the church to be really looking at, for example, how do we reach the emerging generation, as we've been trying to think about with Focus Alive? How do we as a church position ourselves to be a voice of hope and light for the future? From a time that's felt very dark. But adaptability is definitely a skill that everybody can grow in. You don't have to be the most change-loving person. You can grow in that skill, and it's a bit like going to the gym. You know, I've seen you, Nikki, working out in the back garden. You're there, you're working a few muscles, and of course, because you work it out, your muscle gets stronger. And that's, you know, those that have been following Joe Wicks during this time, whatever, they've probably got the benefit of that. And adaptability is a personality trait, but you can grow in personality traits if you exercise them. So a couple of simple ideas would be try something new. So you might have a route that you always walk. Again, I know you do, Nikki, because I often walk around my park with you. But just try a variation on that route. And you may think, well, that's a silly thing, but it's just exercising the muscle of a changed perspective. And something simple as that can just allow your mind to think, oh, it's actually possible to do something that's slightly different, and it still comes out with a good result. And
Sarah, what have you sensed that God is saying to you during this time, the last few months with COVID-19? What have you sensed the Holy Spirit?
I sense a resetting within me. I think there's been a renewed hunger to really seek the heart of God, to sort of strip away. I think life has been so full of distractions, of course, with a young family, and although as I say that there's been a lot more time during this period, but I think you know, without even some of our regular expressions of church, you know, we've been forced to actually engage with our faith and with God in a new way, from our kitchens, from our living rooms. And I think that's been a remarkable thing, to really listen to that still small voice when actually so much of our world is very noisy. And I think coming back to those disciplines of sitting and hearing God's voice for this moment in time has been a beautiful and a precious thing for me.
One of the phrases we've kept coming back to, or trying to focus on, is that this has been an invitation, not just an interruption. This time to grow, to learn, to listen. I think all of us have got more listening to do and more learning to do as we grow and go forwards. We've talked about adaptability, and I've been reading the story of Joseph, who obviously had to adapt all the time. You know, things shifted and changed. The kind of the landscape of his world shifted and changed so often. But the one thing that was constant throughout wasn't necessarily the clarity of what was going to happen next for Joseph, because one moment he's in a prison, another moment he's at the bottom of a pit. It was the sense in which God was present with him all the time. So God always gave him favour, whatever the situation. I've been trying to learn, what does it look like for me to know God's favour, whatever the situation, even if there's disappointment or loss, if there's struggle. And I feel a fresh hunger for the presence of God as we move forwards. And I think our country really needs that. It needs the light and the hope of Jesus to be lifted high again. And it needs a church that are going to come out, declaring his hope, declaring his light. I mean, the emerging generation need that. And my worry, I guess, from this time is that lots of teenagers and 20s, I think, have struggled more with engaging online, and we can't afford to lose that generation. And so we as a church need to gather a sense of hope and light in our voice, that whatever our circumstance, whatever's around us, that we lift up his name and know that God can be and will be present with us, his favours with us, and that we can declare his message anew in this season, at this time, which is, as we know, unprecedented.
Pete and Sarah Wynter, thank you so much.
Thanks, Nick in Pitts. We'll go and do your shopping.